Thank you so much to our panel and co-moderators for really educating us on HIA. It's my pleasure now to introduce our next speaker, Delilah Wilson-Scott. She is the Executive Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer of Comcast Corporation and President of the Comcast NBC Universal Foundation. We are very fortunate, I am very fortunate because I have the privilege of serving on the Comcast Diversity Corporate Board, and I know how seriously they take the issue of and the challenges that we face in terms of DEI. And she herself is greatly serves as a champion in all of the work that we do in making sure that DEI is a priority. In this role, she oversees all diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and philanthropic strategy for the corporation, with a focus on advancing digital equity through Project UP and the company's $100 million pledge to advance social justice and equality. So please give her a warm welcome.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be with you today at the APAICS Legislative Leadership Summit. First, I just want to give a special thank you to Madeline Milka for inviting me here today, but also for the incredible advice, counsel, challenge, and opportunity that she brings to us as an advisory board member to Comcast every single day. The theme of this year's summit, Empowering Our Community, is especially meaningful as all of us celebrate Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and as we prepare to hear from some dynamic women leaders in the community in just a few moments, although I understand from Madeline that women have definitely been well represented across the stage and in the room, so thank you. But the theme is also important to me personally as the daughter of a retired Vietnamese entrepreneur. I think retired and entrepreneur are words she would never use to describe herself. And she's retired in that very Vietnamese sense of the definition. And, she's still making Vietnamese yogurt on the side, still, I'm sure critiquing my eyebrows right now, saying they're not dark enough, but and I pay too much for them, but I love her. And she helped me get to where I am today, and she helps me have a lens on the work I do as Chief Diversity Officer and President of the Comcast NBC Universal Foundation. I'm very proud of what she's laid out for me. And at Comcast, we're deeply committed to bringing more diversity to all of our roles, particularly in the API community and particularly women. We know that greater gender diversity, racial ethnic diversity, diversity of thought, creates more innovation, drives teamwork, drives better business results, and delivers stronger financial results, period. That's not a question. We all know that to be true. We also have, just last year, nearly 36% of our executive leaders and over 46% of our new hires were women. We still have more work to do, while we are incredibly proud of those numbers and aspire to have 50% of women at all levels of the business. To meet this goal, I'll talk about a couple of things we're doing to meet our diverse recruitment initiatives. We have a series of leadership development programs, partnering with Ascend on that front, employee resource and affinity groups, particularly our Tech Women and Women's Network, in addition to many efforts at all levels across our entire organization. Empowering our community means ensuring women, all of our employees, have equitable opportunities to contribute, to advance, and to grow. As a media company, it also means delivering programming that represents the diverse audiences we serve, audiences like the ones in this room. Through our Asian American Film and TV collection on Xfinity, hopefully you've been able to check out celebrating API excellence and so much more. Comcast has been represented on the national board for 16 years. So our commitment is just not about me being here today. We proudly work together on initiatives, driving conversations, strengthening connections, and providing essential resources to the AAPI community. This includes The Culture is AAPI Women, screening in a couple of days in DC. Thanks to APAICS for being a part of that. Katie Fang from NBC News will moderate. We'll talk a little bit about our digital equity work, which spans across the country, whether that's self-help for the elderly in California, Castle in Chicago, CMAC in Philadelphia, and I could go on and on. We engage in many partnerships across the AAPI community to increase digital literacy and inclusion for for Asian immigrants, seniors, students, and additional support for AAPI organizations in other areas across the country. Empowering our community is essential to creating the change that we all want to see, whether that's women in more positions of leadership, including elected office, advancing digital equity, providing small business owners like my mom with the resources to help grow their businesses, and helping create alternative pathways to ultimate success and career. And much of this progress could not have been achieved without the work, partnership, and counsel of the APAICS community, so thank you. Your advocacy to ensure AAPI representation at all levels of society, including the political process from community service to elected office, is something that truly embodies what it means to empower our communities, and we're proud to support you in all that you do. So thank you for being here today and inviting me to speak, and back to Madeline.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Ambassador Katherine Tai, U.S. Trade Representative, and moderator Madeline Swan-Tran-Milka.
Thank you so much, Delilah, for joining us today and for your remarks. It's now my privilege to welcome U.S. Trade Ambassador Katherine Tai for this fireside chat. We've done this before in a different setting on Zoom, and now I get the privilege of doing it in person. So Ambassador Tai was sworn in as the 19th U.S. Trade Ambassador, Trade Rep on March 18th of 2021. I think that was your birthday, right? And so she was unanimously confirmed by the United States Senate and is the first Asian American to serve as USTR. So please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you.
So previous to your role, you also served as the Chief Trade Counsel at the House Committee on Ways and Means, which is a staff role, which is something that I think most of the people here who have worked or want to work on the Hill is of interest. So part of that is a sense of motivation of a career in public service. And so how did that influence your role to join the staff and get on the Hill?
So here's a secret. I had always been interested in working on the Hill in high school, in college, and wanted to land an internship on the Hill and failed. And it's because maybe at the time there was no APAICS. So I think that all of that has changed. So I did not end up finding my opportunity to come up to the Hill, and I realize this is going to date me, until the year that I turned 40. And when I did get to the Hill, I was really excited to be there. But it's funny, by the time I got to the Hill, I had had some of my most formative career development years in the executive branch. I started off as a lawyer at the agency I now lead, the Office of the United States Trade Representative, spent 7 years there, found an opportunity to go up to the Hill. And the secret for me being on the Hill was I spent 7 years on the Hill also. I felt like I eventually became very conversant with the basic ways of the Hill. But having come up mid-career, I could never really compare myself to the people who started their careers on the Hill. There is like something very special about Capitol Hill. And I always felt a little bit like the way I think my parents feel as naturalized U.S. citizens, that on the Hill, I would always have a bit of an accent, be searching for exactly the right terminology, even though I felt fully comfortable there. So when I came back to the administration and the executive branch as the USTR, part of me felt a little bit of a sense of relief because I knew more of what I was gonna find here. But to get to your question about how I ended up in government service, first in the executive branch, then in the Hill, and then now in an administration role, there's the fact that I'm a second-generation federal government public servant. I grew up in this area. Both my parents worked for the government as scientists. My father was a research scientist at Walter Reed. My mom still works at the National Institutes of Health. So in that sense, I sort of followed in the family tradition, except that I did not go into the sciences. So my point of rebellion was doing policy and law. The other aspect of it is I did spend some years in the private sector. I worked for law firms, and something just always seemed to be missing in that work. And I think that over time I had 2 years of experience clerking for federal judges, and when I got to USTR as a staff attorney, I think looking back now, the thing that I was missing before I came into government was this very clear sense of purpose. And I think for me, that's probably been the biggest motivator and the thing that has had the greatest staying power for me in terms of working for our government, which is the sense of purpose of being a part of something larger and trying to be a part of a solution to serve the public and the American people.
Well, thank you. I think this is an example of how public service doesn't necessarily start at a certain age. You know, you have indicated that you came in to public service later in life, meaning for those people who become subject matter experts, they can do a lot of things in interpublic service, and that's why our founder Norman Y. Mineta used to always say, "Please consider joining a board or a commission," because that is also a form of public service. As the first Asian American and first woman of color to serve as the U.S. Trade Ambassador, how do you approach the responsibility of representing underrepresented communities in government?
Certainly. So being both a woman and Asian American, we say first woman of color, which is, I don't know, it doesn't really roll off the tongue, but I feel like just through my own lived experience as a person, very much attuned to when you're at the table or in the room, looking for the person who is sitting in the second row or in the corner, who isn't used to being seen. And I mean that very literally when we are in a room, having a meeting, having a discussion, trying to make a decision, but also as a metaphor for when you set that policy-making, decision-making table and you're looking to bring people into the process. And I think that it is really, really important because when you hear the president talking about America and what defines America being this one word, possibilities, his vision for us is a very, very inclusive society and inclusive economy, that our differences from each other, our diversity is what makes us incredibly strong and different from all the other countries in the world. And I think that that is an important part of what we are trying to do at USTR, to make sure that trade policy making, trade discussions are as inclusive as possible. And I'll say a little bit more here. When we came in, I asked the U.S. International Trade Commission, it's an independent agency, lots of economists, supported also by lawyers, to undertake a study and to look at what the distributional impacts of our trade policies have been over time. And they came back with some very interesting findings. One was that it was really hard to say with a lot of granularity because we're just not collecting the kinds of data that are going to give us a very clear picture. The second part was, to the extent that there was data and there had been studies done and they were looking at this question, that the impacts of our trade policies look like they have been very uneven. They have benefited some parts of our economy, some parts of our society, some geographic parts of our country more than others. And so I think that that's given us a confirmation that we need to be doing our trade policy better, to making sure that the benefits are more inclusive. And also, you know, in trade, when we look at underrepresented, underserved populations, those that haven't done as well, the ITC study showed us that communities of color, women of color, and then very, very interestingly, white men, non-college educated, are all categories of people in our society who have been less benefited by our trade policies. And there again, for us, it's about being inclusive in our vision to set that table more broadly to make sure that our policies are actually working for our economy, all sectors of our economy, and that our policies remain durable and longstanding.
So earlier today, we had Senators Hirono and Duckworth, and they spoke a lot about being two Asian American women in the Senate. They One of them, Senator Hirono, recalled the meeting, or you were testifying at Ways and Means, and the comment that Congressman Murphy of North Carolina had made of you when he said, "I think you might be too nice." So in that vein of thought, what advice would you give to other women and people of color who are interested in pursuing careers in government or trade when there are stereotypes and biases against all of our communities?
Absolutely. I think that one of the reasons why that moment was so powerful, first, it was caught on video. Second is that so many people, so many in our community, have experienced exactly that dynamic. Maybe not those words, maybe not when you're sitting at the witness table, but exactly that kind of a set of assumptions applied to you and how effective you can be in your job. At the same time, just recall a year ago, there were some articles that were published in our, DC-based kind of inside the Beltway news circles that painted me as being not nice, right? And that also was something that I think had gender and race-based elements, right? So you see how there can very easily be double standards, that you're always fighting against someone else's perception and expectation of you, extrapolated against their own biases and assumptions. So I think the lesson I take from all of this is be yourself. And, especially from Senator Hirono, Senator Duckworth, they're very different from each other, but they're both incredibly fierce leaders. They are incredibly strong representers for our community, for women in the United States Senate. And so my inspiration is not to be like Senator Duckworth or like Senator Hirono, because I am also different from them, but to take the inspiration from them to be myself. And, don't let others define you. You define yourself, and then you put yourself out there, and you operate and be as effective as you know you can be.
So I'm going to let the audience know that we're going to have our last question and then have questions from the audience. So please start to think about your questions for the ambassador. So in your role, what do you think will be the priorities of this administration in advancing representation in government and policy, especially around trade?
Certainly. So I mentioned already that we asked the ITC to carry out a study around the kind of a whole of economy impacts of our trade policies, and to try to understand the distributional impacts on different communities, different sectors, different geographies. So that's on the policy side, and that is informing us as we think about how do we adapt the way we do trade policy to make sure that trade policy is not just for the bigs, but also for the smalls, and that we're breaking it down for more inclusivity. The other aspect is, as the leader of the agency, one of my primary objectives is to really look after the health and the future of the agency as an institution. The people, the practices and policies that we have. And I am delighted to share with you that when I joined USTR, there was this grassroots bottom-up movement from amongst the career staff, so my former colleagues and friends, who were organizing a diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility council. So the DEA Council is made up of volunteers. They are full-time staff. They are professional policy staff. They are administrative staff. It's open to everybody. And their goal is to come together to educate each other, to do internal planning, to sponsor events like recruiting events, to do internal happy hours, to try to cultivate and to make USTR, help USTR become a more diverse, equitable, inclusive, and accessible organization. And I have really been delighted to be able to support that groundswell of effort from my position as the head of the agency. And I'm really looking forward for us to create a movement that will be longstanding. And it also does go to thinking through recruiting, the pipeline, and thinking very intentionally about the future of this agency and the kinds of the next generation of trade negotiators and trade litigators that we're going to bring up through the system.
Wonderful. Let's have audience questions. So if you can please, I see a young lady in the back.
Hi, thank you for this informative panel and forum. My name is Contessa Bourbon. I'd like to ask Ms. Katherine, what trade or free trade agreements does U.S. government plan to sign with Asian countries or Latin American countries? Thank you.
That's a great question because USTR, one of the things that USTR has done a lot of in the last couple decades is negotiate a lot of free trade agreements. I think we have a free trade agreement with maybe about a dozen countries in the Americas. There's one that covers almost all of Central America, several bilateral in South America. Obviously, there's also USMCA, which used to be the NAFTA for North America. And also we have some free trade agreements with Asian countries. I think the existing ones are Singapore, Australia, and Korea. Right now, it's part of our new approach to trade to make sure that U.S. trade policies more evenly benefit the U.S. economy and our communities. We are negotiating trade agreements in a new way. We are not doing the traditional free trade agreement, which is an all-of-economy, fully and aggressively liberalizing kind of a trade agreement. Instead, what we are doing is negotiating with the Indo-Pacific countries an economic framework that has trade as one component, but isn't limited to trade. It also covers supply chains, decarbonization infrastructure, and good governance. It's tax and anti-corruption. Taken together, these four pillars are about pursuing a trade agenda with our closest partners in the Asia Pacific to collaborate and to cooperate to promote more resilience, more sustainability, and more inclusiveness in our economies by working together. And the reason why we're doing this differently now is not only because we're looking for different results here at home for our economy, but we're looking for different results in the global economy too. We're responding to the supply chain disruptions that we are still experiencing, but certainly that were very heightened over the course of the pandemic, where we saw that existing supply chains based on this very liberalizing model of trade have become very, very fragile and easily broken. We are also pursuing more sustainability. We are looking at working together, creating incentives for a longer runway ahead of us. This is very much key to our concerns around the climate crisis, where we feel that crisis more urgently today than we have in the past, but also related to the treatment of people and workers that is incentivized through trade. And then, of course, there's the inclusiveness part, where not only do we see widening economic inequality here at home, but in our partner countries as well. This is an increasing trend that we're seeing across the board. So in the Indo-Pacific, what we are doing is negotiating a 14-country framework called the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. And in the Americas, we'll be doing something slightly different, but again, with the same purposes of pursuing and promoting sustainability, resilience, and inclusiveness through something called the Americas Partnership for Economic Prosperity.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. I just think I want your frequent flyer miles, considering all the many countries you get to visit during doing your work. Unfortunately, this concludes our conversation with the Ambassador, and it's now my pleasure to welcome the final panel of this summit.